health risks in wildlife trade, to share your knowledge and to explore opportunities for collaboration. And I'm very grateful for that. We have learned from COVID-19 and also from other zoonotic disease outbreaks that experts' warnings are often acknowledged only at a very late stage, when effective action is a lot more expensive than early prevention. So with this in mind, I would like to encourage you to spread the knowledge about the risks and even more about the measures we can undertake to reduce the risks of HPAI. And if each of you reaches only one decision maker after this webinar today, I think it was worth the time and effort. So I'm very grateful to you, the speakers, and I hand over back to Leonie. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Seiche. Yeah, we are very fortunate that we have two outstanding speakers for today. Professor Thijs Kulken and Saida Alibar. So thank you for being with us today. And yeah, first I'm pleased to introduce Professor Thijs Kulken. He's a veterinarian and a professor of comparative pathology at the Erasmus University's Medical Center in Rotterdam. His research focuses on the pathogenesis of emerging and zoonotic virus infections in humans and animals, as well as preventing new viral pandemics from bats while supporting bat conservation, and also the dual role of wild waterbirds as both victims and carriers of highly pathogenic avian influenza. And today, Professor Kulken will share how fur farming poses risk for future influenza pandemics. And with that, I'm happy to hand over to Mr. Kulken, and yeah, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Leonie, and thank you to the organizers for inviting me. I'll just put on my PowerPoint presentation. So today I'd like to talk about fur farming as a risk for the emergence of pandemic influenza. The outbreak that I'm talking about, the current H5 highly pathogenic AI outbreak, is bigger than any of all of the other high path AI outbreaks together. Since it started in 1996, hundreds of millions of poultry have died or been killed, millions of captive animals, and tens of millions of wild birds and millions of wild mammals have probably died. We don't know the exact figures because the surveillance is not adequate to count this. And out of about 1,000 human cases, approximately 50% have died. So it really is an enormous outbreak with a high disease impact. And in this talk, I will show you that fur farming plays a significant role in this outbreak. I'll talk about an outbreak in Spain, another one in Finland, and also give you some information about the virus presence in mink in China. Before I get into that, I just want to give you some background information about the virus. So avian influenza virus is a virus that is surrounded by an envelope, and on this envelope are two proteins, the hemagglutinin, with which the virus attaches to its host cell, and the neuraminidase, by which it can again make itself loose from the host cell. And it's based on these hemagglutinin and neuraminidase proteins, the H and the N, that the virus is named, because there are 16 different subtypes of H and 9 different subtypes of N. So for example, that's why something is called H5N1. Furthermore, it's important to realize that the genome of this virus is divided into 8 segments, and I'll get back to that soon, why that is so important. So one aspect of this virus is that when the original variant that occurs in wild birds, which does not cause disease in wild birds and hardly causes disease in poultry and is therefore called low pathogenic, when this virus enters into a commercial poultry farm, there are some subtypes, the H5 and the H7, that can mutate into a highly pathogenic form that is causes a high level of mortality in poultry farms. So that's called highly pathogenic avian influenza. Another thing that's important to know is that this virus, avian influenza virus, is actually a bird-adapted variant of the species called influenza A virus. And influenza A viruses are special in that they can infect different host species, mammals and birds. And when they adapt to such a host, they are named after that host. For example, that's why it's called avian influenza virus. The avian influenza A viruses that infect birds. Swine influenza virus, the influenza A viruses that infect pigs. And of course, human influenza virus, the influenza A virus that infects humans. And these viruses don't easily infect other species, but they can switch hosts and do that fairly regularly. So it's not unusual that a virus jumps from one host to another. I said that I was going to explain why it's so important that this virus has a segmented genome. And the reason is that it makes so-called reassortment possible. And what is meant by that is that if 2 different influenza A viruses happen to infect precisely the same host cell in a bird or a mammal, those viruses let loose their genome into the cytoplasm of the cell, and this genome can recombine, can mix up again, so that you get progeny viruses, daughter or son viruses, that have some characteristics of one parent virus and some characteristics of the other parent virus. And this allows for a very fast evolution of influenza viruses and is very important for the human risk of these viruses. And this is explained in this cartoon here, because human influenza pandemics that have occurred approximately every 20 to 30 years in the last century typically originate by this reassortment of human influenza viruses with influenza viruses from birds or from pigs or from both. And that happened in 1918, 1957, and 1968, when there were gene segments from birds added to the human influenza virus. And in the last human influenza pandemic in 2009, there were gene segments introduced by a pig virus that contained not only gene segments from pigs, but also from birds and from humans. So it was actually a quadruple reassortant. And how does fur farming fit into this? Well, fur-bearing mammals, and particularly mink, are potential mixing vessels where this reassortment can take place. And this slide shows you 2 sets of information. On the left, you can see a table with the different influenza virus infections that have been found in farmed mink. And you can see that these mink can be infected with different human influenza viruses, with avian influenza virus, with swine influenza virus, and there have even been reassortant viruses between humans and swine influenza viruses, and between avian and swine influenza viruses found in farmed mink in different countries in North America, Europe, and in Asia. And to bring it really to the point, the right part of this slide shows you an article where researchers have experimentally tried out whether this H5 HiPath AI virus can reassort with the currently circulating human influenza virus H3N2, and it was found that this very easily can happen. So there is really a risk for this to happen. This work was done in ferrets, but they are mustelid species that are very related to mink. So I've told you something about the virus. I'd like also to tell you something about fur farming, because you may not be familiar with that. Although fur farming is decreasing in recent years, it still is a substantial industry. And in 2023, worldwide, over 12 million mink pelts, over 2 million fox pelts, and over 6 million raccoon dog pelts were produced worldwide. Most of these fur farming production is concentrated in 6 countries around the world: China, Poland, Russia, the US, Greece, and Finland. But there are smaller fur farming operations in 14 other countries in Europe and also in Canada. And on the right, you can see photos taken from the Finnish fur industry of the 4 different main species that are being farmed. So, having told you something about the virus and something about fur farming, I'd like to go back to the outbreak. So this H5 HiPath AI outbreak started, as far as we know, in 1996 in a poultry farm in the province of Guangdong in southeast China. And the poultry involved here were domestic geese, in which a morbidity was seen. And the virus that was emerged here is the parent virus, as it were, of all the H5 HiPath AI virus variants that have been found since then. And therefore, they are all called viruses that belong to the so-called goose Guangdong lineage. And here, very quickly, is the spread of this virus worldwide in the last 28 years. So it started in southeast China in 1996. It spread a year later to Hong Kong in 1997 when it first infected people. It stayed for a few years in Asia, but then in 2005, it spread through wild birds, a very unusual occurrence, to the Middle East, to Africa, and to Europe. It ping-ponged back and forth between these parts of the Eurasian continent and Africa for some years. And then there was an important event by which it spread from Europe to North America in 2021. Once it got there in Newfoundland, it spread within a few months right across the North American continent to the Pacific West Coast. And at the end of that same year, it also spread to South America, where it wreaked havoc across the continent in poultry and in wildlife. And a few months ago, it was first noted in Antarctica. So I'm not going to talk about this whole outbreak. I really want to concentrate on the fur farm aspects of it. And the first outbreak I want to discuss is this outbreak that happened in farmed mink in Galicia in Spain. And the map shows you the location of the farm as a red dot. And the photo on the bottom are actually the farms, the barns that constituted this farm. So this farm had 52,000 minks that were held in wire netting cages in 30 open-sided barns. The mink showed clinical signs, mainly bloody snouts and neurological signs. They developed upon and was found by post-mortem examination a hemorrhagic pneumonia, and out of the 15 animals tested, 14 were positive for H5 Hypath AI virus. The same virus was detected in seabirds, gulls and gannets that were found dead on the coast. So that is the likely source of the virus for these mink. The virus that was analyzed in these mink had mutations, including this one in the polymerase B2, which confers an adaptation to easier replication in mammalian cells. This virus spread very quickly throughout the farm, which suggested that there was efficient mink-to-mink transmission. And to stop this outbreak, all the minks on this farm were killed in batches of 150 to 200 animals and their carcasses destroyed. There were 11 farm workers involved with looking after these mink and at the end killing them. And they were tested for influenza virus and luckily tested negative. So this was the first big outbreak that was found with Hypath AI H5N1. The next one was substantially larger. A year later, there was another large outbreak in farmed fur-bearing mammals in the southwest of Finland. And here at the bottom, you can see a map showing the locations of these farms. And on the top, you can see how a typical fur farm in Finland looks. So on these 27 farms, there were 250,000 individual fur animals of 4 different species: red and Arctic foxes, American mink, and raccoon dogs. They developed both respiratory and neurological signs. At postmortem, they had a pneumonia, encephalitis, and liver necrosis. And again, H5N1 virus was isolated from them. The same virus was detected in black-headed gulls that were living on breeding colony sites on nearby lakes. So this was the likely source of the virus for these minks and other fur animals. The way that this virus spread so easily from farm to farm was likely because the farmers were feeding the dead or the killed fur animals to other fur animals on other farms. So this was a very efficient way of spreading the virus. Again, the mutations that were found in this mink virus were both in the PP2 and in the NA, the neuraminidase, and they potentially increased the pandemic potential of this virus. Again, all the animals on these farms were killed to try to stop the spread of the virus, and there were 32 farm workers that were possibly exposed, and they, again, luckily tested negative for both seasonal and influenza virus and H5 avian influenza virus. So the other area from which we have some information about Hypath AI virus in farmed mink is in China. So between 2016 and 2019, in the major farming areas for mink in northeast China, sera were collected from 34 different mink farms, and 2.8% of the sera that were tested, over 2,000, had antibodies to the H5 Hypath AI virus. Besides that, there are sequences of Hypath AI viruses from mink from China in an international database, indicating that viruses have been isolated from these mink. But we don't have any further information on morbidity or mortality of mink or other fur animals in China. Knowing what can happen with the high-path AI virus in fur farms, what are the possibilities for us to mitigate its risk? These consist of improving surveillance to be able to become aware of the outbreaks earlier, to increase biosecurity. And here is a cartoon of such a mink shed indicating that there is basically no biosecurity on these mink farms. Free-living birds and mammals have free access to and from mink farms and often visit these farms because the food is placed on top of the cages so that other species also can access it. And third, it would be to stop feeding raw poultry and raw swine products to these mink. This is how in the past they have been infected both with avian influenza viruses and with swine influenza viruses. And finally, the possibility is to vaccinate fur animals against H5 high-path AI virus, as well as fur farmers. And also, it would be advisable to vaccinate the fur farmers against seasonal influenza virus to reduce the risk of reassortment occurring. So if instead of trying to mitigate the risk, we want to try to prevent the risk of influenza from fur farms, Tom Peacock and this Barkley from the UK, both virologists there, wrote a very convincing essay, opinion article in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences of the USA, indicating that mink farming really poses a risk for future viral pandemics. Their considerations were that mink and other fur animals are housed in large numbers and in high density, which provides suitable circumstances for a rapid evolution of influenza viruses, including into pathotypes that have an enhanced pandemic potential. Their second consideration was that minks are susceptible to both human and avian influenza viruses, and to that I would also add swine influenza viruses, and therefore they're a mixing vessel for reassortment, and this is a known pathway for pandemic emergence. And from this, they concluded that governments should consider banning fur farms at the national level in the interest of pandemic preparedness. This may not be as utopic as it sounds, since many countries have already banned fur farming. And this world map shows the countries where fur farming still occurs, where it doesn't occur, and where it has been banned. And in total, there have been 13 European countries that have banned fur farming at the national level, and another 6 that have introduced legislation to end it in the near future. And another 2 countries have such strict regulations that fur farming has been phased out in this way. And outside Europe, in Japan, New Zealand, and British Columbia, fur farming is partially banned. So this actually may be a very viable option. So in summary, I've shown that the disease burden of the current high-path AI outbreak is greater than that of all high-path AI outbreaks in the past together, that this is a key concern for public health based on the pandemic potential through either mutation or reassortment, that globally there are still more than 20 million fur animals being raised for their furs, and that particularly mink are known to be infected with different influenza viruses from birds, pigs, and humans, as well as with reassortant viruses, that there have been outbreaks in Spain and Finland involving over 300,000 fur animals, that these outbreaks have generated viruses that are more mammal adapted and that were likely transmitted efficiently among fur animals, and that we have measures to either mitigate the pandemic risk by surveillance and biosecurity and vaccination, or measures to prevent the pandemic risk involving national bans of fur farms. So with that, I'd like to thank Kappa-Flu and VEO. They are two European Union research collaborations, as well as a number of working groups that I'm involved in and from which I learn a lot about influenza. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Thijs. It was a really interesting talk, especially the fur farming perspective. Great. And yeah, if you have any questions, please type them in the chat so we can discuss them later in the Q&A session. Yeah, and so up next is our second speaker, Mr. Ali Bar. He is, I will introduce him to you, of course. He's a veterinary parasitologist and a principal laboratory technologist at the Ministry of Agriculture in the Gambia. And during the HBAI outbreak in the Gambia in 2023, he was in charge of the CVL's response, and currently he is pursuing a PhD with the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine on pathogen surveillance in the Gambia. And yeah, now Mr. Bar will lead you through the situation and the response towards the HBAI outbreak in wild birds in the Gambia. Yeah, and with that, Mr. Ali Bar, if you like, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much, Nora and the team, for this wonderful organization. And I stand on existing protocol and thanking everybody who's made it here today. Basically, I will introduce you to what we did when we responded to the highly pathogenic avian influenza outbreak in the Gambia. That was in 2023. So basically, this is the first time Gambia recorded highly pathogenic avian influenza outbreak, despite it's been...
Okay.
It's okay? Are you getting me? Okay.
Yes, we can hear you, Sado.
Okay, sorry about that.
If you could put your slides into presentation mode, then we can see them a bit bigger. If you... Now you're muted, sorry. We can't hear you. Can you unmute yourself? Saida, can you? Yeah, that sounds good.
Sorry about that. Okay. Yeah, okay. So as I was saying, Gambia is a very, very small country in West Africa, and which is also a good thing in the sense that you can get to any part of the country in a day or within 24 hours. Do what you want to do as a veterinary service. We can reach each community in the Gambia. We don't have those areas that people usually call hard-to-reach areas, but also it's a very densely populated country. As you can see, it's 2.7 million in this small piece of land. So introduction of the poultry sector, which was threatened by, or which is still threatened by highly pathogenic avian influenza. It's a young growing poultry sector. I usually describe it as a fragile sector in the sense that people usually practice low biosecurity, backyard production, as well as smaller scale production. So, and also mostly you have youths and some women doing it just at the back of their compounds without so much regard for biosecurity. So also we've begun to see commercialization of the poultry sector, especially in the western part of the country. And that is also very good, despite the fact that Gambia still heavily depends on the imported poultry and poultry product. So by introduction, the Department of Livestock Services, which is the veterinary services of the Gambia, is responsible for animal health intervention, disease prevention and control. So this falls under the Ministry of Agriculture, which is headed by a Director General, and both animal production and animal health matters are managed by this same institution. At the headquarter level, you will see we will have the Central Veterinary Lab, the Epidemiology and Information Unit. Then in the regions, in the Gambia, if you look at it, the map on the top right is divided into 6 agricultural regions. So each is headed by a regional livestock director, and under him you have surveillance officers posted in cluster of communities. You will find one field staff covering 20 to 30 villages, and then another one covering this. So they are usually mobile with motorcycles that they are able to visit farmers and report whatever animal health matters that is going on. So if you look at this is the surveillance system that we have in place that will help us detect disease events as well as animal health emergencies. So at the bottom of the chart, you will see livestock farmers and what we call the Sanitary Defense Committee. The Sanitary Defense Committee are very important in our surveillance system because they are selected farmers in each village or in a very small cluster of villages, about 5-6 villages. You will have one individual trained in basic disease identification and who will have contact with the livestock assistant who is just in front of him. So the livestock assistant.
We can't see the slide yet. I think you have not moved to the next slides. We still see the second slide.
Oh. What about now?
Now you're still on the second slide.
Oh, and I am moving to the third slide. So
if you want, I can share the slides. I have them as well.
Okay, that will be.
Now it works.
Okay. If you could then put them in the presentation mode, that would also be great.
Yeah, that's what I was doing. So how about now? Are you seeing the animal health surveillance information flowchart?
Yes. It's not in presentation mode, but we do see it. Perfect.
It's not on presentation mode?
No, it's not. But it's okay. We can still see it. So please go ahead. Sorry for the interruption.
Yeah, sorry. I tried to do it from my end. So basically, the information flow from us to the remotest community in the Gambia to the highest level in this chart. So in that way, we are able to get the information that is recorded in the FAO tool called MI, and then, of course, receive at the epidemiology and information unit that is at the central level. So when this information reaches at this level, either from, for example, as we will see later, the highly pathogenic avian influenza come from a sister institution, then at the central level, where you have the Deputy Director General of Animal Health, usually a meeting is conveyed and what step need to be done. If it is an emergency that is beyond the regional livestock director that they cannot control or manage at the regional level, then a team from the central level, mostly from either the veterinarians, because we have few who will be deployed to work on that situation. So normally this is how we operate when there is an animal health emergency system. So talking about highly pathogenic avian influenza, in the West Africa region, the disease, as we had in the first speaker, around 2005-2006, first cases were reported in West Africa. That was in Nigeria. Again, almost 7 years later, Nigeria again, they reported some H5N1. And again, later, after a few years, it goes and come back. Then since 2018, it has almost been present almost all the time in the region. And as it gets closer to Gambia, the 2021 outbreak in Senegal in a poultry farm, that there were layers which half of them, almost 50,000 layers, died, was when we said that this is imminent. It's gonna reach Gambia. We need to do something. So by March 2023, again in Senegal, they reported wild birds being dying, and they tested. They found out that it was H5N1. So within the same period, we started seeing birds dying along the beaches of the Gambia and the West Coast. that's around Tangier and the Koto Creek and the Bijol Island. So the Department of Parks and Wildlife Management is the government institution responsible for managing wild birds and their reserve. So they reported
Excuse me,
this.
Saida. We can still not see your slides. If you briefly pause your presentation, we can share them from our side because they don't go to the next one. So if you close it, we can share it for you.
Okay, let's do that. So
sorry.
Let me stop sharing. Okay, now I stop sharing. Maybe you can.
Yes, it should be loading. So let me know if you can see.
I can see the first. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. All right. I think that.
I can see it.
Okay.
It's still loading at my side. Probably the
Perfect.
internet. Yes. Okay.
Okay. Let me know where you would like to start. Which slide?
Okay. Let's go ahead. Continue. Okay. Now go back. Sorry. Go back. Go back. Back again. Back to this. Yes, basically. So here is fine.
All right.
Can you go to the next slide, please? Okay, here. Yes, so in April 2023, we reported, we found out that birds were dying, and the lab team here, together with the people from the Department of Parks and Wildlife, we went out for investigation and collected samples. Can you move to the next slide? So we collected samples and do a field testing at that point in time, and we have rapid diagnostic tests that we use. We found out that some of them were positive, but we know it is not enough to confirm an outbreak of highly pathogenic avian influenza without that. So prior to the outbreak in the Gambia, when there was an outbreak in Senegal, there were some steps that were taken by the government of the Gambia, including banning of importation of poultry products from all countries that were importing or exporting poultry product to the Gambia, including Senegal. So throughout 2021 to 2022, the government of the Gambia tried to get funding to mobilize people and train, as well as raising awareness so that people will understand the disease that people are talking about, including the farmers. Can you go to the next slide, please? So in preparation for this, the Sanitary Defense Committee, as I was explaining, were trained, the farmers, all the stakeholders, with the funding from FAO, we were able to get more additional motorcycles, and we started training our lab staff and our field staff on understanding what highly pathogenic avian influenza is. And along the way, we raised awareness, talking to people. As I said, it's very easy to move along the country so that you will be informing people. So next slide, please. So while we are doing this, we were also trying to seek funding. And this document that you see here, the Integrated National Emergency Preparedness and Response Plan for Avian and Human Influenza, was developed when there was a threat in 2015, but most of the time it remained dormant without being used. But actually, it was the best tool that we have to fight avian influenza. So it detailed all the steps that need to be taken by the country when there is an outbreak in the region, when there is an outbreak in the sub-region, when there are human cases in the Gambia. It's chronologically and stepwise describe what we need to do. So with the consultation, although the timeline for this document had passed, but then it was the only relevant tool to respond to the outbreak. So it was very useful for us. Next slide, please. It was very useful for us in detailing all these activities. So coming back to the outbreak in March, if you look at the photos, they are down there. These are the rapid diagnostic tests that we had at that time, that were the only one we had in place. So when we use them, some of the samples of the dead birds or the sick birds turn out positive. So we had to contact the Senegalese Veterinary and Research Laboratory, which is just 6 hours drive from here. So they were very cooperative. They allowed us to take our samples and tested them within 24 hours. And we know that the Gambia is experiencing highly pathogenic avian influenza outbreak. So next slide. So at this point in time, we already have issues of people and rumors that were going out, and people who were passing by in this area find some of us, my staff and myself, collecting sample or collecting this dead bats. So before you know it, people had already in social media diagnosed the disease, and we are talking about there's bird flu, there's this and that, and it nearly become a problem before we are able to confirm the disease. So luckily, with the rapid and the fast movement of the stakeholders, we were able to get, next slide, we were able to get the results confirmed that it is using real-time PCR by H5N1 in Senegal. So immediately after that, people were informed, a press briefing was made, and all the stakeholders, next slide, were converged at the DLS headquarters to discuss what are some of the things that we needed to do. So in the Gambia, it's important to highlight that at this point in time, we didn't have a One Health team that was operational. So what we have were teams, ad hoc teams from the Ministry of Health, Department of Parks and Wildlife, from the Veterinary Service, and the farmers were all called to come together and discuss this situation. So in this, we divided ourselves into different groups. Some will be on resource mobilization, like the directors and the other people in senior government officials and the FAOs. And then the other people like us were in committees in surveillance as well as infection prevention and control. So each member of a committee were tasked to do certain things, including visiting live bird markets and sensitizing people. As you can see, some of the photos here at the bottom left corner, some of the birds that were unable to fly, we found out that some children were catching the birds and taking them home. So it all turned out to be a very risky situation that could just explode. And furthermore, you will see at the beach where the birds were dying, some of the domestic bird, like the second photo on top, was a domestic chicken that was feeding at the beach at the same time where the birds are dying. So these birds, in the morning, they'll go there to feed, and in the evening, they'll come back to the home and mix with other domestic chicken that are reared under the extensive system. So all the conditions were there for the disease to explode and jump or spill over to the domestic and then probably to other mammalian species, as we have seen with the disease. But luckily, the team were also not official, but they were very proactive in responding to this. Each one was committed. And with the little resources that were available, with vehicles, and we were able to sensitize people and start informing farmers of also what needs to be done. Next slide, please. So farmers keep calling and the department keep on responding to what has been happening. After we received the confirmation of the H5N1, then we officially started communicating to people with those who can read and write. We have a situational reports that were generated on every 2 days. So this was shared with all the stakeholders, while the people who cannot read and understand the document, we had radio shows, we have the photo that you see on the top right. This is a drama team that is well known in the Gambia. They are very good in spreading messages. So we come and explain to them what is the situation like, and they are able to talk to the locals in the language that they can understand best, using drama and all kind of communication format to make sure that people don't just go with the social media rumors that were happening, but also understand what is at stake, what are the risks, what each and every individual needed to do. Next slide, please. So it worked well for us at that point in time because, as I said, it's a small country. It was easy to get to any other place and communicate. So the samples that were taken to Senegal were further taken to the FAO reference lab, highly pathogenic avian influenza reference lab in Italy, Padova, and to which further characterization of the virus revealed that it is the BB genotype that has been circulating in some part of Europe and also in the rest of the region. So it also highlighted that the migratory birds that are going between Africa and Europe probably are the ones spreading the disease. And also that it only, at that point in time, both Gambia and Senegal, it was only limited to wild birds. Next slide, please. So after the outbreak, some of our colleagues from the Department of Parks and Wildlife were also looking around where they can have support in terms of either technical or financial to help either train their people or build their capacities. So this is how they get in touch with the German epidemic preparedness team that was deployed in the Gambia in September. So the team came to Gambia and did a very wonderful job. You can go to the next slide. They were able to train both our lab staff and the field staff of the people at the Parks and Wildlife Department. For us at the veterinary side, this was the first time experience having our team trained on molecular diagnostic using PCR to test. So it served as a basic foundation for us, as well as the people at the Ministry of Health, that is the National Public Health Lab, were trained on this, including biosafety and biosecurity. Next slide, please. So in addition to this component of the ZIG deployment, we also did a joint risk assessment. One Health, all the stakeholders converge, and we try to look at the risks of the disease entry into the country and the risks of exposure and this spillover to other species. So we came out with a very interesting and valid document that we are able to use now in order to input our national integrated emergency response plan that tomorrow we are going to validate. It has been updated, and we will look at it tomorrow to finally validate it. So the input from that document also, as I said, is derived from the joint risk assessment that we did with the German epidemic preparedness team. Next slide, please. So looking at that component, in addition to that, they were also able to train the parks and wildlife rangers, because as I keep saying, the Ministry of Health is more equipped than the Department of Livestock Services, but also we are a little bit more equipped and trained when you compare to the Parks and Wildlife Department. So their staff were also trained in infection prevention and control by the ZIG team. So the outbreak stopped at the wild birds and died down gradually with the inputs that people make and going to collect the dead birds and sensitizing people. So after the outbreak has ceased, so many activities has happened. I want to highlight some of it, which include continuous training of laboratory and field staff. This, what you see here, is the Central Veterinary Laboratory. The time of the outbreak, it was in a very bad shape. But after that, we are now having a molecular capacity at the veterinary side for the first time. And hopefully when there's another outbreak, hopefully we will have people that are trained who will be able to collect and test the sample without waiting for the rumors to get in. Next slide, please.
Dear Saida, can you try to wrap up so we have a little bit of time for Q&A, please?
Okay. So in addition to that, we were raising awareness. We continue talking to people. You can go to the next slide so that they will know more about the disease and they will be able to do what is important for them. So developing documents, we also updated the document that we have. We have now animal health bill that we will be able to use in terms of emergency to better control these diseases. Next slide, please. And that's the one of the last two slides that I have. Yeah, so we still have gaps, like the One Health Rapid Response Team is not instituted. There is no emergency funding for this kind of issues that when there's an outbreak, you can just go and tap into. So those things delays response. And as we know, this is like that when there is not immediate response, the problem might just increase. Next slide, please. So in conclusion, we say this small outbreak highlighted the weakness that we have in the institution, both the Ministry of Health and the veterinary services, but also there need to be contingency plan, emergency response plan that are in place. So as well as joint collaboration, because we couldn't do this alone, we had to work with other ministries. So it is important to formalize this engagement by having a national One Health, which is still on the process of being validated and launched. So basically, this is what I have to share with you today, and I'll be happy to respond to your questions. Next slide. That should be the end of it. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Saida. Thanks for the interesting presentation. I apologize for interrupting you, but this way we have some minutes left for some questions, and I can see that there are plenty of interesting questions in the chat. Also, there were some hands raised, so please don't be shy, but let's start with a question for Thijs, for Dr. Köken. Does banning fur farming in certain countries include the ban of selling or importing products? Because a ban of in-country production would only lead to an increase of import of such products as long as the demand is there, wouldn't it? So please, Dr. Köken, I think this question is for you.
Thank you very much. Indeed, if the consumption of fur products, if you put it that way, is not stopped, then the production also may come from somewhere else. So if you look what is happening in practice, is that some countries both ban the production of fur and also the selling of fur. Other countries, they have one or the other of the measures. But I agree that indeed these things need to be considered together, both the production and the use of fur.
Thank you. The next question is for you, Dr. Aliba. Did the management of this outbreak, was the management of this outbreak multi-sectoral? If so, what was the role of other sectors mainly?
Yes, it was a multi-sectoral because the outbreak itself started from a different sector, that is the Department of Parks and Wildlife, as well as we involved the National Disaster Management Agency in the Gambia, the Red Cross, the farmers, and the local authorities. Because in the Gambia, if you are doing any intervention, if you don't get on board with the local authorities, your messages will not be accepted, or there might be a problem in passing the messages. So each individual, including the police and the security service, all of them were converged at the same place, and a periodic meetings of every 2 days was done so that people will come and do their update. As I said, people on higher government ministers were tasked on resource mobilization for immediate PPEs and other resources, for example, vehicles and fuels, while people, some of us were also going to collect these carcasses and effectively disposing them by burying them. So each sector was involved and people were doing different things.
Thank you. A proper One Health approach, like we like it.
Yes.
I do have a couple more questions, so maybe we can do one or two more. So the next one's also for Dr. Köken. Thanks for the excellent review. Vaccination sounds like a great solution for producers. However, could you please expand on the potential risks of vaccinating fur-bearing animals like mink?
Yes, so one of the main risks of vaccinating mink, or other species for that matter, is the potential for the virus to be present in the population, but not as easily noted. So when you vaccinate mink populations or other populations of captive animals, you also need to change and probably intensify your surveillance efforts of these populations to make sure that there isn't any so-called silent circulation of high path AI virus.
Thank you. I know that we're running out of time. We'll do one more quick question. I think this is for you, Saida. How were the carcasses managed? What measures have you taken to secure the carcasses to prevent the spread of the virus?
Yes, during the outbreak, all the birds that died or the birds that were sick and unable to fly, they were captured and killed and buried at the site that they were found. So people were going with digging materials, so they will dig a hole and then bury these carcasses there. So this is how we dealt with all the carcasses that we were able to find during the period.
Thank you. Okay, looking at the time, I think we will wrap it up here. We have some more questions. Maybe we can send them through to both of you, and maybe we can forward the answers to all the participants later on. So with this, I would like to thank everyone. I don't know if Mr. Seiche will come in for some last words, or otherwise we can wrap it up, but you're welcome to say some last words if you want to.
No, that's fine. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Took home many new insights for me. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Then we thank each of and every one of you for participating, and to the presenters for taking the time to share their knowledge with us. And have a nice, wonderful morning, afternoon. Thanks so much.
All right.
You're welcome.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Yes, thank you so much.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
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 Bye. Thank you.
Bye all.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.